All right, good evening, everybody. All right, so there was in a Craigslist world, and apparently, you know, according to one person, I'm not saying any names, and he very well could be right, that the Geo Tracker Suzuki Sidekicks are one of those vehicles that people buy just to fix up and flip. And he's probably right, because when I was looking for my unit, I had my eye on another unit all the way out in Texas. And that guy was saying the exact same thing, and his was probably in much better shape than mine. He eventually sold it. His was initially listed at 6,500 on Auto Trader, and a lot of the stuff that he did to it. And mind you, he was not trying to make profit off of it, but he did. According to his ad, he was the Carfax. Replace everything that could go wrong with it. That includes things like gas tank, fuel pump, clutch cable. There was also a four-wheel drive in the manual. He also put in a stereo, with a backup camera. I know, do you really need one for those? But that's what he did. And now the shape of the 96 versus the 90, for the stereo, it was a different shape. Meaning those took the like the bigger back, so he could actually put in a bigger stereo. Now mine doesn't have that, unfortunately. Mine's got like the thinner spot. So that's that. And I had lengthy conversations with him because again, a vehicle like a Geo Tracker, or hell, an AMC Eagle, it was another one that actually has a true cult following. And I think when vehicles get cult followings, I could be wrong in this, but when certain vehicles get a cult following, they often evolve from being those vehicles that people buy, fix up, and then flip. Because a lot of the older vehicles that people want, they're getting harder and harder to come by, especially those without rust. And again, I'm no car buying expert. Trust me, I know. I probably did overpay for my unit based on the condition it was, based on what other people have said. Especially in the forums that I'm in. I'm a member of Suzuki forums. A vehicle, might as well look for forums that'll help you out in that. Now, obviously, my sense is, I'm not letting people beat me up over the price of what I was asking for. I did take it down a little bit for now, but I did put in the catch. If I do any more, then it's going to be subject to change. But obviously, I don't even really want to sell it. It's only listed because of my current situation. And kind of went into that situation. Look, I'm just trying to buy a fucking plane. Get the fuck out of the U.S. If somebody buys it for what I'm asking for, then just gonna fucking buy a plane ticket, fucking park my Santa Cruz in an illegal spot, board my flight, and just get the fuck up on out of here. And Hyundai Financial and fucking city officials can duke it out. But I just don't give a fuck, Now, mind you, I've always said, I've been under the school of thought, you pay your debts. Now, if you can't fucking find anything to actually pay your debts, at least in the area that you're at, then just say fuck it and relocate. Now, I may get an opportunity in some other state as well, so I got to look at it that way. Now, I could be wrong. And, keep in mind, if I start applying for, jobs out in, Florida, California, Texas, Alaska, they're going to see my resume and be like, who the fuck is this jackass? Unless I have a human connection in those states. The reason I was able to get the interview at my, previous job was the government contract because, I had a human connection in Virginia. I was in Massachusetts at the time, doing landscaping construction. I know, maybe I should have stuck with that, in hindsight. But I mean, I can't go back and, I can't go back in time. We haven't figured that out yet. This isn't Bill and Ted's or Back to the Future. We just haven't figured that stuff out. Moving forward, like I said, when you experience things, like a job loss, you just have to, sit back, reevaluate what you have for expenses, and some things just have to go. Like, subscriptions, secondary toys, like the tracker. You may even have to let your daily go, and that's unfortunate. And like I said, I didn't buy the tracker just to have it be like a just in case shit goes south. If I was that worried about it, I would have just kept my old Colorado as that backup vehicle, just something to get me from point A to point B. But anyhow, that's that. I just got to keep plugging along. Something will turn up, I hope, and I'll be able to keep both cars. So, yep. But back to the topic here. It was a lengthy conversation based on car selling and flipping, and a lot of people, including the initial seller of the tracker on the island, said the same thing. People will buy like the rusted up one, and they'll fix it up, and it'll look nice. And trackers aren't the only vehicles that people will do that for, because people maybe start looking at some of those older vehicles. Now, one thing I do want to mention, if you're one of those people who buys vehicles just fix and flip, and you make a habit of that, then yeah, taxman will probably be looking at, where you're getting all this money, But ironically, they don't see what you spend it on, so make that shit make sense. And obviously, the place I actually got my unit from, the tracker, it was a used car lot, and obviously they find vehicles at places like auction lots, and they probably get them for dirt cheap. In fact, it's funny, I went into Craigslist just for amusement purposes, typed in four-wheel drive, manual transmission again, just out of sheer boredom, and I came across a Ford Explorer, Sport, like the two-door version. And, obviously that was from an auction lot, and just for giggles, I reached out to them. Okay, can you tell me about the condition of the vehicle, the history, does everything work? And of course, they're going to bounce me around back and forth through each other. So there was some sketch there, It might not have run. And I see a lot of people, who sell cars. I've said this, recently, if you see something that's like $1,400 or $1,200, there's a reason for that. There's a real reason for that. Unless maybe it was something like a Geo Metro or a Toyota Tercel, maybe you might get lucky. And I've seen people just get lucky and they find like the perfectly running $500 car. I've seen people get lucky that way too. And that's like luck. Like I almost had a chance to get a AMC Eagle, which again was the actual cult following vehicle, from an eBay auction. But we all know how those go. So you're also gonna swoop in at that last fucking minute and boom. So Murphy's Law on that note. So whoever got that specimen, and it was a nice specimen too. Again, it was in similar body shape to my tracker. No rust, but some surface spots. But what do you expect? And I'm sure whoever ended up with that is probably having a ball with it. And they might try to flip it too, but I think when vehicles end up having cult followings, it's only certain types, like AMC Eagle and Suzuki Samurai, the ancestor to the Geo Tracker sidekick, and the Vitara. Those have cult followings. Those fetch fucking big bucks. The potential buyer. I'll be correct here. He had a Scout, and some of those are fetching big bucks just because of what they are, just because of how well they're built, and they're so hard to come by. Because again, most of them just became piles of rust and just became part of the environment over the years. I mean, heck, I wouldn't be surprised if you started seeing S10s having a cult following. Because they don't make them anymore. They replaced the S10 with the Colorado. So I wouldn't be surprised if S10s or hell, even maybe older Rangers, when they were still small, while everything else got big, started having cult followings. I know the Toyota Hilux, that's another one with a cult following. Because again, finding one that isn't like super rusted up and a bunch of shit wrong with it is like a rare gem. I mean, we've all seen, what Top Gear and obviously later on Whistling Diesel did with the Hilux. We've all seen those videos. How much effort it really, really took to actually destroy that truck. So, we all know the history behind the Toyota Hilux pickup. And old school Land Rovers, that's another one. Old school K5 Blade, that's another one. When they're restored. Now, are they qualified as having a cult following? I'm not sure, but I know those are going for ridiculous money. Especially the K5 Blazes and some of the older pickups. Because again, they were made to last. That's the way they used to make things. And again, obviously it doesn't take a genius to figure out. If you're looking for a beat a car, don't get one from the Northeast. Or actually, don't get one from above. Above the Virginia line, or maybe Maryland. You might get away with southern Pennsylvania, Ohio, southern tips of those. Might get away with the southern tip, but anything above what they call the Rust Belt. Yeah, don't get any of those vehicles. That's why, I kind of got, lucky in a weird way, because, mine was from the South. It originated in Georgia and trickled its way to South Carolina. An even better location would be the Southwest, California, Texas, because it's dry out there. So that's why I see a lot more older vehicles look practically new. And again, I'm not giving people advice. I'm certainly no expert in, buying cars. This little project was like a first for me. And again, I didn't get it to try to flip it or make money off it. I initially got it because I wanted something that was a four-wheel drive, a manual, that I could take on trails, and not really give a shit if I get a ding somewhere, unless there's something crucial like a headlight. But, if I were to get, a new Tacoma, a new Wrangler, 4Runner, whatever, something new that was four-wheel drive, take on trails, I'd fucking feel guilty about it for the first few years. And then, of course, naturally, you want to see what it's capable of. I beat the holy hell out of my old Colorado, and I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did, but, that's neither here nor there. Now, currently, Tracker is at a shop, getting some stuff done that I just don't have the tools for, nor the space to buy the tools for that I only use once. So to me it was like an overall learning experiment. And again, I like driving. It's fucking fun to drive. It's more fun to drive than even my old truck. You know, no, it doesn't go fast, but it's a stick, and you're more engaged with it. And you know, again, you know, the vehicles, you know, that have cult followings, you know, there are certain types, and obviously, I think eventually tractors and sidekicks might make that list. You know, especially the ones with the Geo badge instead of the Suzuki badge, because you know, you type in Suzuki sidekick, they're harder to come by than even the Geo trackers. You know, for whatever reason, and I think it's because of the name Geo. When they first debuted, you know, obviously they were like the American versions of imports. You know, they were just rebadged other cars. You know, I'm not going to reiterate everything, you know, because you can find a number of videos on those. But obviously, before that, you know, the four makes that Geo had that I remember from those commercials, getting to know, you know, were the Prism, a Toyota Corolla, the Storm, and a Isuzu Impulse. By the way, I think those, in theory, could be cult following type vehicles because those are fucking impossible to come by. The Metro, and you guessed it, the Tracker. And the Tracker went the whole run from 1989 to 2004. And that was the only one. The Storm didn't last that long for whatever reason. But, you know, the Prism and the Metro, I think, went to like 2000, 2002 or something. But the Tracker was carried all the way from when they got rid of the Geo brand. They just rebadged the other three as Chevy Prism. And I think with the Chevy Prism, they spelled it correctly. I know with Geo, they spelled it with a Z instead of an S. Chevy Metro and Chevy Tracker. And then they just did away with all those for whatever reason. But, you know, again, there could be lots of other vehicles that just, you know, may have cult followings and, you know, some that, you know, really don't. You know, maybe they're just vehicles that people just want. You know, some people need beater cars, some people just want beater cars, you know. Like, I wanted to beat a car for one specific purpose. And, you know, for me, you know, while, you know, I may have overpaid for what it was a cheap alternative than getting a fucking brand new side-by-side that probably could cost 5 to 10 times that. Not to mention getting the kit to make it street legal. So for me, it made economical sense to buy a Geo Tracker for what I want to use it for. Anyhow, I'll talk to you.